Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of American Grit with myself, Tim Jensen. We have a special show for you today. I say that every episode, and I mean it, because today we're talking about national security. But it's not the national security that you would normally think. It's national security at a much different level. And that's happening down at our local communities. And with us today, we have Sandy Wall, a distinguished figure whose career spans decades in law enforcement, training. He's even a writer. He's a master peace officer, serving over 28 years in the Houston Police Department and the SWAT teams there as well. Spending 12 years as a team leader in the HPD SWAT teams. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Sandy Wall, how are you, my friend?
I'm well, and I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. So, we talk about a lot of different subjects here on American Grit, and one that I've always thought was something that we have not talked a lot about, and it's fitting, being it's Police Week here in the month of May, is talking about the national security. We talk about national security at the military level, but how does national security work down at the local level with police politics and making sure that our recruitment standards are in place for fielding a strong police force in our communities and at the local level in the United States? How does that all fit into this bigger conversation that we're having at the federal level?
Well, it's a struggle and it's a challenge, and I honor those people that are willing to go out there and put on that uniform and go out and do the job. I would say that the talent pool nowadays has changed, and as it has over hundreds of years, the culture changes, the skill sets that we see, with the new Gen Z or X, I'm not sure what it is, but they're coming from a different generation. I mean, I grew up in a household that didn't even have air conditioning, and I didn't miss it because I didn't know any difference. Right. Now that I'm used to air conditioning, I wouldn't think of living without it. The skills, the culture of the people that are being recruited now is obviously different. So, I mean, let's face it, a lot of them have never been in a fist fight. Mm-hmm. You think of the Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And I would think that's the real challenge nowadays, is training those individuals up to a standard that they need to be at, not necessarily for what you want them to do, but what you hope and pray they never have to do. Yeah. Because if they're unwilling or unable to do that, in that instant where life and death hangs in the balance, not just to themselves, but the person to their right and their left are just as in jeopardy if they don't meet that standard. Then bad things are going to happen, and people are going to die. And I used to work an extra job at a bank, and we made pretty good money, a lot more than a security guard did. And I can remember the bank manager coming out and said, "Man, you just stand there all day. I can pay a security guard a hell of a lot less and do that job." And I can remember looking at him and saying, "Sir, you don't pay me for what I do. You pay me for what you hope to God I never have to do." Yeah. And that's what these agencies have to be training these young men and women coming out. Thank God they're willing to step up and do the job, but they have got to be trained and prepared. And the agency is just as important that they identify those people that aren't going to be able to do it. Because let's face it, the military, law enforcement, there's a whole bunch of jobs that's not cut out for just everybody. Yeah. And law enforcement especially.
Absolutely. We understand a couple things, right? That the younger generations of America that's coming out of high school today, 68% of them are overweight. Most of them, I don't know what the percentages are struggling with some sort of mental health. We have a very less than exciting physical fitness standard in this country. Nothing like when you and I were growing up, falling under like Kennedy's weightlifting or just physical standards, right, for America. And the failures of the breakdown, right? That you mentioned there. You're a former Texas law enforcement officer, right? A former SWAT member. What failures, as close to home as Uvalde, right? That we see some of these officers that, regardless of TTPs, tactics, training, and procedures, just failed to execute a task that, presumably got more people killed. Is that an example of what you're talking about when you're talking about failure and breakdown of training and procedures and people not being in the right position?
Yeah, absolutely. It could be the lack of training, or it could be poor training, which is just as dangerous and sometimes more dangerous because they think they're trained, but they're not. Yeah. And it's trained to a skill set under pressure. Anybody can do a job when they have a resting heart rate. But when your heart is racing somewhere between 180 to 200 beats per minute, and you've lost cognitive thinking skills, you've lost fine motor skills, and you're at fight or flight or panic, that's where a lot of people revert back to. And people say, well, you know, oh yeah, I'd do that. Yeah, I would. You don't really know until you've been in that situation. And I would say that a famous Paul Howell quote is, "Courage is contagious, so is cowardness."
Well, 100%.
And then when you sit there in that situation and you don't have anybody step up and be the leader, and I would tell you that in that hallway at Uvalde, I think if one person would have stepped up and said, "No, let's go, on me, let's go," and took off down that hallway, I bet you, I would be willing to bet a bunch of those law enforcement officers would have followed him. Yeah. But nobody in leadership or had the ability to step up and say, "On me, let's go." Yeah. And it costs lives.
Yeah, it's an incredible failure of leadership, right? And you know, I often just the story itself reminds me of when we were training to go to Iraq. We went through a lot of behavioral classes and understanding patterns and training and this, that, and the other. And I'm reminded of a story, you know, this idea of regression to the mean, right? Where you will always revert back to your greatest training, right? You're never going to exceed, well, never is a hard word to use. The likelihood to reach your full potential is less than the likelihood of reverting back to the mean, right? And what I mean by that is there's a great study that was shared with me during this training of 4 FBI agents that were found in a shootout that all had lost their lives. And the most peculiar thing about that was that in all of their pockets, right-handed shooters, left-handed, in their left pockets, they found gun casings. This was during the time of revolvers, right? And they're all scratching their heads like, what happened? Like, why do all these dead feds have casings in their left pocket, right? And they're all just going around until it dawned on them that, wow, in our training, we are training these agents to shoot and then police their brass, put the brass in their pocket. So during that conflict, they reverted back to the mean of what their training was and saying, hey, I've got to pick up my brass, even though I'm in a gunfight of my life. I'm going to revert back to what makes sense to me, where my body is comfortable, where I can take myself back to that, or the fight or flight response, and apply that. You know, it's an incredible thing to think about how the human mind works. And when you are introducing less than qualified individuals to this type of paradigm, or the standards are relaxed, I believe, you know, we start to see the failure and the collapse of leadership, right? And then it allows these things like Uvalde. And you can go across, you know, Uvalde's, I picked that one because we're both here in Texas. But you can go down the list on the failure of leadership, you know, and it's not just, you know, in police. I point to several in the military. But the failure of leadership is always what these things go back to, right? So we could talk about, you know, the aspects of train to force, right? But are we missing a big part of training the leadership to say, hey, get in the arena, man?
Absolutely. You know, I love that quote by Teddy Roosevelt. You know, the honor goes to the person, not necessarily who wins or loses, but who had the courage to step into the arena. And I would say that we get back to training being a perishable skill. Yeah. Too many law enforcement agencies say, well, you've been through the academy, so you're good to go. I'll see you at the end of your career. If that training is not refreshed on a regular basis and with meaning and with purpose, you know, it's one thing to stand there under resting heart rate and take your time pulling your weapon from your holster and finding a good sight alignment and taking a trigger squeeze. That's about as realistic in a gunfight as me throwing a snowball. Yeah. It's just not going to be like that. People, you're probably pulling your weapon because a gun's already pointed at you.
Correct.
And no one is going to stand in one spot and try to win a gunfight. The first thing you should be doing is moving, and hopefully moving to cover. So, but can we do that on a range? No, don't you dare move. It's dangerous. Well, I'm telling you, are we training like it's realistic? So I'm about realistic training, putting those people in a situation that is going to be as real as the real thing as we can within safety protocols. Simunition, force-on-force training, where someone's shooting back at you. I can remember training people all day long and saying, hey, I want you to pick up that ballistic shield, and, well, no, we're to live fire. I would rather have a long weapon. I'm like, okay. And then at the end of the day, hey, we're going to put away all the long weapons, and we're going to bring out the simunition. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll put a bad guy in there with a simunition weapon, too, and the first thing you want to do is pick up that ballistic shield. And I'm like, what are you picking that up for? Well, to stop from shooting me. And I'm like, well, a while ago when we were shooting live fire, you didn't want that ballistic shield. Yeah, but those simunition rounds hurt. And like, put the damn shield up. If you're not scared of real bullets, you shouldn't be scared of simunition rounds, okay? Train as you fight. Yeah. You do it the way you would do it in a real deal. And I've got a million stories like that in my book where people train one way, but they didn't do it in the real world the way they train.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Goes back to. I remember this moment. I'm on the range, right? I'm leading this course of instruction. I'm a sergeant of Marines, and I'm teaching them how to do quick mag changes, right? And this is when the Marine Corps just came out with the gun, like the mag bag that your dump pouch and all that shit. And I'm like, man, this is stupid. Like, what are we talking about here? So I was training these Marines at the time. I was like, in a gunfight, you're not going to be worried about where the fuck you're putting that next magazine. You're going to be thinking about where you're putting the next. How fast can I get to the next full mag to keep putting rounds down on target to suppress fire or move on the objective, whatever the case may be. So I'm training these Marines like dump your mag, throw it on the ground, and just keep moving towards the objective. And this officer stops my range, pulls me aside, starts dressing me down in front of all these Marines. And I'm like, sir, first of all, this is my range. You can kindly fuck off, get off, because the way that I'm training these Marines we're training them how they're going to be engaging in a fight. And if you want your Marines to be worried about making sure that this magazine that costs 1 penny gets put into this dump pouch that is now an addition to our gear that we don't give a fuck about to begin with. Like, what are we talking about here, sir? And he didn't like that particular answer, and I had to go and defend myself in front of the battalion commander. But at the end of the day, the logic won, right? And again, you train how you fight. Like, I'm not gonna spend very precious seconds in a gunfight worrying about something that has little value to me killing the enemy.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Winning that fight, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, with all that being said, the recruitment, where do you see some of the bigger challenges in law enforcement today in getting the right people into the jobs?
Well, it's identifying those right people, and obviously I've never been in recruiting, so there's marketing and there's all that stuff. But the job has to be firstly financial, because they're competing with tech companies and companies that pay a hell of a lot more than law enforcement. So the job's not for everybody. I get that. So you want those people that want to be a cop for the right reason. Yeah. And then secondly, they're not picking it just because it's a career at it. I can remember a chief telling us that everybody with 5 years in SWAT had to move on. And why is that? Well, to give opportunity for other people to be in it, because this is a resume builder. And I'm looking at them like, really? We want the best people in SWAT picked for the right reason. And once you spend 2, 3, 4 years training them up, now they're at a value that you can't replace, and you want to go get rid of them so someone else can build their resume. Yeah. SWAT's not for everybody. Law enforcement's not for everybody. You pick those individuals that can do the job. So we've got to make it attractive. We've got to and we've got to put them in the training that we can identify, once again, those people that are not cut out for the job. And have the huevos to step up and say, I'm sorry, this is not for you. That standard you talked about. I can remember being out in California and watching a course of fire and just being blown away. And at the end of it, I walked up to the range master and I said, is this a SWAT team? They said, no, this is our deputies. And I said, well, are they like this advanced handgun skill? And he said, no, this is our qualification. And I said, sir, I'm from Houston Police Department, and I'm telling you about 90% of my police department could not pass this course. This is an amazing course. And he said, well, about 90% of ours couldn't either, but we got a new sheriff in town. And he said, here's the standard, ladies and gentlemen. He said, I'm going to give you 1 year to meet this standard. And if you can't meet this standard, you know what? I got a job for you in the jail, but you're not going to be out on patrol. And he said, we had people threatening lawsuits and threatening to quit. But he said before long, they were coming in on their weekends and they were going out and finding classes they could go to improve themselves. And he said within about a year, we had about 90% meet that standard. He said the rest of them are working in the jail. Yeah. He said it comes down to where you set the bar. I mean, cops are human beings, and few of them are self-motivated, but a lot of them are just going to do what's expected of them.
Yeah.
And that's not the people you want. You're going to have to set that bar, and everyone will want to meet that bar. And the ones that can't, then maybe there's another career somewhere else for you.
Yeah, I think that's extraordinarily important. Like, it comes back again to leadership, right? Leadership sets the tone. Leadership sets the example. Leadership sets the pace, right? And I think it's fantastic to hear that anecdote of an example of like we're going to train the force, and and if you can't meet the expectations, we'll find somebody better.
There you go.
Right? Because, at the end of the day, like we're talking about human life and protecting human life. If you can't hold yourself to that standard that is expected to be out on the street to ensure that life is being protected, then you're not qualified.
I was quoted in an article recently, and I read the quote, and I thought, yeah, I said that, but of course they didn't leave out the things I said before and after that.
All the
they made it sound as worse as possible, and I just said that if the public only knew how poorly trained some police officers are, they would scare them to death. I said, thank God the crooks don't know. Yeah. Now, I obviously said that before that. I said of no fault of their own. Right. Most cops would love more training, but there's budgets and there's manpower, and we've got to have you on the street, because every time I pull you off the street to go to training, there's nobody there to fill that spot. And I get that. That's part of the problem. But if they'll see movies where cops can do all this trick shooting, I'm going to tell you that just doesn't happen in real life.
Right.
Once again, you get the fine motor skills. Sight alignment and trigger squeeze is a fine motor skill. Every time I was in a gunfight, I didn't have any fine motor skills. Yeah. It was a crunch. Right. I'm telling you, fine motor skills are gone.
You're not saying, okay, slowly
squeeze. Hold your breath, release it. That doesn't happen. Okay.
Right. It's more like, I think I just pissed myself.
Exactly. I mean, you want to shoot a beautiful course of fire, that works. Yeah. But you want to survive a gunfire, don't stand around and try to do that shit.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. We talk about what makes law enforcement difficult in the United States. You cannot turn on the television or scroll social media these days without some sort of negative media article about policing in America. I'd love to hear your unadulterated thoughts on it.
Well, it's like every other profession. We're painted with a broad brush. You go see a doctor and he doesn't do you right, and then these doctors are full of shit these days, And if somebody sees a cop doing something unprofessional or, heaven forbid, illegal on a body cam or on a dash cam or somebody else's iPhone video in it, and we're all bad. Yeah. And everybody knows that is the individual, not the individual, not the norm, right? Because most cops go out there every day not wanting to take a life. They're not wanting to do anything illegal. They just want to do their job and hopefully help somebody. And we've got bad ones out there. I'll admit, there's people wearing a badge and a gun that should not be. And I would tell you that most of the people that bust them and take them off the street are other cops.
Yep.
Because we hate that. It makes us all look bad. And then we have to live past that. We had a situation in Houston early in my career that made all the news, and some cops went to the penitentiary. And my God, here I am, a young cop, trying to do my job, trying to do what's right. And everybody I arrest, I'm getting blamed. Yeah, you're going to do that to me like those other cops? And I had to live with that crap. I hate it. But we're just people. we make mistakes, and we do things that sometimes we wish we had a chance to do it again. But unlike an accountant, I can't just take an eraser and erase that number. Yeah. That split-second decision I made was when I had very little cognitive thinking skills. I reacted, and now I'm being judged by somebody who's sitting on their coffee with their feet on a coffee table under normal resting heart rate and watching it over and over and over, taking their time to decide whether or not I made the right decision in a matter of a split second.
Yeah. And most of that's being led by I don't know, social experts that are saying, that have never been in a position or been punched in the face or been in a position of violence, and they're like, oh, I'm going to make this, this altruistic, opinion that's based in no fucking fact ever, and it's going to, put the life of a good standing law enforcement individual potentially behind bars for the rest of their life, because, again, at the point of that instant, right? We have a system of justice in this country that is innocent until proven guilty, right? That doesn't seem to apply towards law enforcement. It's always it appears framed by the media that this cop is a racist and woke up today to go kill 6 black guys and a couple white dudes and maybe go rape a woman, right? That's what you would get from reading any of the media today on today's law enforcement in America, which I think is fascinating. Just understanding the stats, right? Of 330 plus million Americans in the United States, and less than 1 million law enforcement individuals are policing the streets of America to protect and serve the citizens of this country. And these people are being, making 30,000 plus contacts a year, being involved in some of the most traumatic, things that you could possibly imagine, from death, murder, domestic disputes, sexual trauma, all this stuff. And we're going to paint law enforcement with such a broad stroke in this country. It's just fascinating to me, and I'm always interested in hearing like how somebody that spent an incredibly long time in uniform works, knowing that you have an agency out there that's speaking ill. Like, it almost like takes me back to whenever I meet somebody from the Vietnam period, it's like, man, what was it like being in Vietnam to know that the American press was calling you baby killers and all sorts of stuff in that regard, right? It's very similar.
Absolutely, and it's part of the reason I didn't go in the military, because I wanted to go to the jungles of Southeast Asia. And then after the end of the Vietnam, right when I was coming out of high school, military had a really bad opinion, or I had a bad taste in my mouth out of it, and I ended up going to law enforcement. And that was as a result of what the media was feeding us. Yeah. I was seeing individual incidents, not the big picture. And so I was a victim of that as well. And maybe that's part of the recruiting problem, is we've got to overcome that somehow. I don't know how that's done, but those statistics you quote are what's even scarier is there's a large portion of those numbers, they're not even in a uniform and a marked police car out there on the street. They're doing detectives, they're in administration, they're in the DARE program, and nothing against all of that. Those are all necessary, but those even take those numbers down to the real guys and gals that are out there wearing a uniform doing the job day in and day out.
Grunts first pogues, man.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a lot of support inside of the law enforcement aspects of these things. So it's probably maybe 60% of that million is actually on the street doing patrol.
I would say that'd be a good number.
Right? That's incredible to me. Yeah. Right? That we would degrade and rather than ask the question of like, how can we do this better? Like how can we look at budgets across the United States and say, are we funding our law enforcement enough in Chicago, in LA, in these areas where there's high crime rates and murder. Here in San Antonio, right? We have a DA that is less than motivated to charge on some of the things that normally you'd see jail time for, right? Like it is peculiar to me that again, it's leadership, lead by example, right? Law enforcement is is an agency that is enforcing the laws of the state, right? That has been voted into place, and then you got the DAs, right? That are the ones that are saying, okay, here's what we're going to prosecute, and here's what we're not going to prosecute. And it seems like the DAs are the ones that are now saying, well, you know what? We don't really have a lot of confidence in our police department anymore. We're going to just say we're not going to deal with petty crime and things of this nature anymore. So you law enforcement don't engage.
And there's nothing more demoralizing than to risk your life and go through all of that and then see the guy out quicker than you could finish writing your report and doing the paperwork. And I would say that there's I had an instructor in academy tell us one time, and it's so true. You will stop more crime just by your mere presence, by the deterrence of you rolling down the street, because the crooks rather, quite often think that we're capable of a lot more than we are.
Yeah.
I'm rolling down the road sometimes. My wife said, "Look out, there's a cop over there," and I'm like, "He's not looking at us. He's on a traffic stop." "Well, you think you should? What if you're speeding?" And I said, he's busy on a traffic stop. But it was amazing how many cars will slow down because he's got somebody pulled over. Well, he's not running radar if he's out on a traffic stop. But it's just an example of the deterrence. Your mere presence out there on the street, how many crimes you deter because a crook is thinking about doing something and he sees a patrol car roll by and now maybe I should not. One company in Houston, they take used police cars and they rent them out to hotels because they've got that marked police car sitting out in front of it and there's nobody in it. But a crook rolls through thinking about stealing a car or doing something nefarious. He sees that patrol car and thinks there's a cop here somewhere, rolls right back out and goes somewhere else.
Yeah. It's TTPs, tactics, training, and procedures, right? We talk a lot about that. So tell us a little bit about your SWAT career. You spent a significant portion of your professional career inside of that aspect of law enforcement. And as I understand it, it goes back to the late 70s. So very fundamental in your abilities of and experience in setting up what SWAT looked like in the Houston area today.
Well, I always had something driving inside of me to achieve, to be a little bit better. And, I was competitive in powerlifting and a little bit in shooting and just trying to be the best that I could be. It's a great saying. And a challenge that I saw within the Houston Police Department was maybe make the SWAT team. To be totally honest, I never thought they'd take me, but I tried out and I was accepted. And it was in 1979, I can remember, and walking into that unit and just being blown away at what they were capable of doing. Now, later on, I learned how behind the times we were. Even though at the time we would respond to hostage situation, we respond to barricaded subjects. And to be totally honest, we really didn't have a lot of expertise in hostage rescue, so to speak. Even though if one came up, we'd try to muddle through it. Sometimes it went well, sometimes not so well. And then as luck would have it, we started training a lot with the special op military guys, the Delta Force and the Navy SEAL guys. And that's where we really took a new paradigm shift in our skill sets, learning from those guys what the skills that they had to go into a foreign country, fight their way in, do an op, and fight their way out. And we were taking those and modifying them. Obviously, their rules of engagement are a little different from ours, but modifying those skill sets to improve the way we did business. And we just took a giant leap forward in our capabilities as a result of our relationship with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much the same across the United States, right? You go back into the mid 70s, there really wasn't much of a SWAT, like in comparison to what we have today, right? But rapid, over 20, 30 years, rapid advancements within, the needs of the SWAT, mostly in urban areas. But why do you think that was? Why, having lived it and seen it and gone to conferences all around the country, what was driving a lot of that?
Well, obviously there was a need, I always say that the smallest little community might have the SWAT situation from hell.
Yeah.
There's just as likely a possibility that a wacko could walk in there and try and take down a building and need a SWAT team to respond. So they need the training just as much as the big cities. Now, just by the sheer numbers, it's more likely to happen in a big city. So obviously the big city SWAT teams, they get more experience because they respond to them, just because of the sheer numbers. But the same skill sets are needed in both environments. Our relationship, because of the buildings that we had around the city that were going to be torn down, those units love to come down and play in them and blow things up, and they create an environment similar to what they might have to operate in over in Mogadishu or God knows where. So that was fortunate for us. But luckily, a lot of the guys that had served their time in Delta or in SEALs or whatever were coming out with these skill sets, and they were hanging their shingle out to, hey, I'm going to put on these classes and teach you either combat shooting or hostage rescue or God knows what, and boom, what a business it opened up for him. I mentioned Paul Howe earlier. I mean, he's developed a hell of a business over there, training law enforcement and the skill sets that he learned as a Delta operator, and there's untold numbers out there doing it. And so that ability spread across law enforcement at a rapid pace, and as a result of it, the communities are safer because of it. Heaven forbid they should find themselves in one of these situations. The teams that are going to be coming in there are better prepared.
Yeah, 100%. Now, one of the questions I've always thought to be interesting, and I have a lot of SWAT friends, so this is one I always like asking them. Is like, the relationship, again, like SWAT members, police officers, members of our community, right? They're Americans like you and I. We're not talking about like blue helmet guys coming in here from another country to police downtown San Antonio. So when it comes to Second Amendment and gun rights, how does the SWAT a SWAT team generally perceive the Second Amendment relationship with the community and their line of work?
We have no problem with it. I would say far and away. I mean, every person out there that has a legal right to own a gun should own one, and probably should own a bunch of them, and be proficient with them. There's wackos out there that can get their hands on a gun, whether they're illegal or not. I mean, how many years have drugs been illegal? And they're everywhere. Right. If you want drugs, you can go out in the street right now and buy it. So you can make anything you want as illegal as you can possibly make it, and it's still going to be there. The only thing you're restricting is the law-abiding people, the people that follow the laws, from doing that. And so we usually had no problem with that. Now, did it backfire on us sometimes? Every once in a while, we would come up that individual who was former military, who had skill sets, who was heavily armed, and for whatever reason was going through some sort of traumatic psychological episode, and was a danger to himself and others. Yeah. And we had to respond to that as well. And that's all about knowing your adversary's capabilities. And SWAT's not about taking lives. If it has to happen, it's going to be quick, effective, and efficient, right? Yeah. But it's about saving lives. We always said if we ended a SWAT situation and we had to use deadly force, that was a failed mission. Sometimes we were forced into failure. We had no other option. Yeah. But we're about saving lives. I don't think any law enforcement agency is going to keep a SWAT team around very long and pay all that extra money for equipment and training if all they're going to do is go out and kill people. Right. They want them to save lives, and that's usually what happens. I can remember a police chief telling me one time, he said, every time SWAT gets on the scene and a life is saved, that was money well spent. It's like an insurance policy. You don't want to pay those premiums, but if you're in a wreck, you're thankful you got that insurance policy. Yeah. And that's really what SWAT should be about, another capability to save a life.
Yeah, like that. And it goes back to what you said earlier, like you're getting paid in the event that you have to do the work, right? And protect. So as you're growing and coming through the Houston's SWAT program, You're finding yourself in leadership positions. What were some of the bigger challenges that you were coming across in the earlier days from a leader's role in developing TTPs that made sense for the demand that you were seeing in the city?
Well, I was fortunate to always be under the mentorship of a really good team leader. I'm not going to say they all were, but all of them that I could think about in Houston were really good. And the two that I specifically worked for passed a lot of things on to me. Some of them would leadership by follow me, let's go do this. And others were like, hey, step in front, you take the lead, I'll be back here, but this is what I want you to do. And both of them can work, but I always like the word follow me. Once again, I mentioned Paul Howe. He kind of has a saying that if you can do what I can do, then you can go where I can go. And I would much rather lead by example, lead you into that battle, be that Teddy Roosevelt on the back of that horse charging up San Juan Hill, But as I became a team leader, I realized that my position was not best served up at the point, because I can't see what's going on behind me. My position is further back in the stack, usually 3, 4, 5, 6 position, watching people in front of me and making those decisions. And if I'm not, amped up as much as being at the tip of the spear, my cognitive skills are a little bit better. And so I lost a little bit of the excitement. But I felt like I was better served because of the things that I had learned and the things that I had been through and the experiences I knew. And hopefully the decisions I made under pressure were better served from me being in that position.
Yeah. And from those learnings and the development and the pressure that you're finding yourself in for, finding new means of non-lethal engagement, you came up with a patent of your own.
Yeah, that was by trial and error, but I basically developed a bang pole, and I used a new technology, the defense technology had come out with called command initiated, where they use shock tube to remotely set off the flashbang. And it was designed originally to set like an ambush if a guy's coming out and he's talking about, you're going to have to take me out, I'm not going to be taken alive. Well, we could pre-place a flashbang, and when he gets to that rose bush, set it off, and that would be a distraction, and then we could deploy maybe some less lethal tactics, maybe send a dog, and kind of create the MOS principle, the multiple overload of the sensory system, and take him into custody without having to use lethal force. A sniper can take that squeeze shot from 100 yards away all day long. That's not what we're there to do. We're there to try to resolve it without lethal force. So anyway, I thought, in the old days, we had a cable pull system, and it had a lot of mechanics involved. It had a lot of failures. And I thought we'd just take this command-initiated technology, put it on a bang pole, and work it like that. And the bang pole is designed to deploy a flashbang into a structure where you don't just throw it through the window. That's old technology. Bad things can happen when you don't know where that thing's going to land. But if it's on a pole, then it's an aerial deployment. It's pre-placed, pre-planned, and it's most likely to do an efficient job and not get things destroyed or people hurt. And so once I did that, then I'm testing this device and deciding that, hey, I could probably sell this and make some money. And then I started testing it to failure, trying to make the thing, see if it would explode. And I started realizing what the overpressure of a flashbang was. And I was amazed. And then I got the guy that was welding for me to build me a chamber big enough to go over a deadbolt and a doorknob, and insert that flashbang inside of it and set it off remotely on a pole. And it blew the door open. And I'm thinking, maybe I need to get a patent attorney here. Yeah. So $12,000 later, I've got the entire system patent, and we've sold them all over the country. It's called the WallBanger, www.wallbangersystem.com. But it's been a big success and a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully I've saved a life or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as you're an inventor. I haven't met a lot of people that have patents to their name. But what was some of the approach that you were making to that problem solving? Right, you're talking about reducing the lethality of these things by changing the approach, right? How. When you're going through I need this pressure chamber to be 2 inches bigger. I need more of this. You're not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but you're making practical scientific method applications. What was what were you thinking during that time period?
Well, it was really just fundamental down to trial and error. And believe me, there was a lot of prototypes. That's not going to work. And then another project, and we go try that. That's not going to work. It needs to be bigger. It needs to be longer. It needs to be heavier metal. It needs to be a double weld. I need to change the design. So it was probably a year and a half of going through that trial and error process. And I'm just working on this part-time with another guy who was a retired cop, and he was a welder. We were in his garage. And then finally we got the design. This thing is working each and every time. And, there's a lot of agencies out there that a little bit more advanced that had gotten to explosive breaching, and that's really what it is. But they were using high energy, things like C4 and det cord, and there's a lot of smaller agencies out there. Their command staff is saying we are never having explosive breaching. And then I'd say, but you got a flashbang, right? Well, yeah, we got flashbangs. Well, this is flashbang breaching. Yeah. It's not high explosive, it's low explosive. And as a result, there's less collateral damage, it's more kindly or friendlier sounding, and they could sell it to their administration, and it does basically the same thing. Yeah. So believe me, it's a very basic, simple structure, and it's a very basic, simple design. I couldn't have come up with it if it wasn't basic and simple.
Yeah. How many departments is this currently
hundreds, all across the country, Canada, even in the military. So yeah, there's I don't know how many. I probably should have kept track of that.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm sure we're going to show some video of it, and if you guys see like the strange little caption or a little compartment by your front door, you're about to be breached. The WallBanger. Why the name? What came up?
Well, my wife came up with that mainly because it's an alcoholic drink. In Houston Police Department, we called flashbangs bangers.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to bang, you were going banger, banger, and then the guy that was the grenadier deploying, he would say banger up, and he'd deploy. And so that was that. And then so Wall, the guy that designed it. And we're all thinking, what are we going to call this? And my wife says, well, you guys call them bangs, right? Yeah. Well, what about WallBanger? Yeah. And then, yeah, that's catchy. And that's how it happened.
There you go. It's always the better halves that come up with the good ideas.
Absolutely. Marrying me, probably not one of her best.
Very good. So you're 28 years in the Houston PD, right? And you're coming up to your retirement. You're like, all right, I've had enough. But another opportunity presents itself, and the Safari Land. An incredible organization and business that well known in Copland, and you take a sales job over there.
Yeah, well, one of their companies was Defense Technology. So about the last 8 years of my career, I was an adjunct instructor for them. Basically meant I'd take a week of vacation and they'd fly me to somewhere in the country, and I get to meet a bunch of cops I didn't know, and I'd go out and show them the munitions that Defense Technology was making, and this is the stuff that we use. So right. It seemed it was an easy gig, and I got to see parts of the country I'd never seen before. And then they kept asking me, "Man, hey, you're getting older. You're about ready to retire?" And I'm like, "I'm not old." And then I went and looked in the mirror and I went, "Oh my God, I am old." And so they said, "Look, you can just come to work for us right away, do it full time." And then we sat down and talked, and I found out how much more the corporate world paid than law enforcement. Right. And I thought, this is a no-brainer. And I was older, and I had lost my step a little bit or two. I felt like I was still an operator, but not at the level I was at one time. So it just made sense. They said, but it's kind of a rite of passage. We're going to put you on the street. You're going to be a sales guy, so you're going to be calling on agencies. And I didn't think I'd like that, but I loved it. Because I would come into town like Santa Claus. I'm giving away free kit, and I'm taking guys to lunch on a corporate card, and they think I'm wonderful. And this is great. And I'm driving all over South Texas, just loving it. Right. And then, lo and behold, I get promoted to what they call a regional manager. And now I'm not dealing with cops anymore. I'm dealing with distributors, and it's all about businesses and pricing and, headaches. I hated it. Yeah. And I'm literally thinking about either quitting or, hey, put me back out on the street. I loved that job. And the training director position came open. And I was all about training my whole career. And I thought, hey, now that's a gig for me. And I applied for that and got it. And I never looked back. I spent about another 12, 13 years as training director. And I managed about 44 adjunct instructors from all over the country. Most of them either were cops or ex-cops, or some of them were former military. And just managing the program, going out and teaching a little bit as well, just to keep my finger in the pie. And then I decided, I'm at a position where I think I just manage this WallBanger thing and kind of retire. Yeah. And I told my wife, I said, if I retire, I'm going to have to find something to keep me busy because I had too many of my friends had become alcoholics. A couple had committed suicide. And I said, I got to stay busy. And she said, man, you're always telling those stories. Why don't you write a book? And I said, I can't even spell. What do you mean write a book? And she said, look, I will help you. If you will write the story, I will edit it, try to make it make sense, and then we'll work on this. So I kind of did it as a little part-time gig. You know, I'd get up an hour early in the morning and write a little story, and she'd hand it to me, and she'd get a red ink pen out and just rip it up and give me a big frowny face. And I'd get it, and I'd write it again, and then she'd still rip it up. And probably about the third or fourth time, I'd get a little smiley face. And man, I was so excited, like a kid coming out of the first grade, you know. And so I'd tuck it away in a little folder in my computer, and I'd write another story. So over about 3 years, I ended up with enough stories that we had to spend another year doing a storyline to make this all make sense, link it, and next thing you know, I got a book. And the first publisher I offered it to, they said, we want to publish this, and the rest is history.
That's incredible. That's incredible. What is your time at Safariland? What is the most memorable training experience that you had?
Wow, most memorable training experience. I would say going to Bill Rogers' school at LJ, Georgia. I'm going to give him a plug. He's the best instructor I think firearms instructor that I've ever been to. And he taught me more about shooting a handgun than I had learned in 28 years in law enforcement. That is a week-long course, and it is extremely humbling because he will break you down and let you realize how much you don't know about shooting a handgun. Yeah. And his courses are unbelievably challenging. He's got a basic, intermediate, and advanced level, and unless you're a world-class shooter, don't even think about making advanced. If you're a good shooter, you might at the end of the week make intermediate. If you're an okay shooter, you'd be lucky if you make basic. And I was extremely proud. My skill sets were still pretty high when I got to go to that school that I made intermediate by the end of the week. And that was a big one to me. But yeah, his philosophy on training was things I'd never even heard about. And he teaches you about training your subconscious mind. He's a really, really smart guy. I highly recommend it. Bill Rogers, LJ, Georgia. Great shooting school.
That's great.
And all the Black Ops guys go see him, and they train with him.
All right. Let's see. I got another question for you. Do you think how much would law enforcement change if they were given a competitive wage?
I would think, now, what you mean by competitive with the private industry?
I think that, in general, cops are extraordinarily underpaid. It's almost like they're a couple stages above poverty. Mm-hmm. Right.
Especially in the rural areas, because let's say the bigger cities, they've got a bigger budget, they've got, a bigger tax base. They're going to usually pay their cops better. Yeah. But you can get down to some of these small towns, they're barely above minimum wage. I mean, I've known some that they're scraping by. Yeah. And so obviously, if we could do that across the board, probably couldn't do it across the board, but if you could bring them all up, especially those rural small towns, because they've got just as dangerous a job. They may not come across those dangerous situations as often as in a big city, but the ones they come across are just as dangerous, if that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. And they don't have the training opportunities. They don't have the equipment. I mean, I'd go to some of these smaller agencies and do a school, and I'd ask them about a ballistic shield, and they'll look at me like I'm talking French. No, we don't have a ballistic shield. Well, do you have this? Do you have that? No, we don't have that. Yeah. But they're out there still doing the job, and most of them, not only do they have to be a patrol officer, but they also got to be a crime scene investigator. They got to run radar. They've got to maybe do the DARE program on the side. They're also doing training at the academy part-time. It's just they got to wear so many hats. Yeah. But yes, could they draw more people if they paid more? Absolutely. I would like to think that the best ones that come into law enforcement are the ones that come in because they just want to be a cop and they want to do it for the right reason. Now there's some bad apples out there. I'll be the first to admit, but it's a competitive salary would improve the talent pool untold.
Yeah, I feel the same way about the military. right? You know, the military is having its own recruitment issues, and it's mostly you look at married families in the military. You know, the 1 in 4 families are on food stamps. Blows my mind. Like, you work for the federal government, how are you on food stamps?
Shouldn't be.
Right? And then there's a smattering of problems there. You know, so I firmly agree. Like, you want to answer the recruitment and the retention problems of our services, our uniformed services. You know, from local to military, let's pay these people more, right? It's the 21st century.
It's a no-brainer.
Right? We write a $1 trillion defense budget, and about 1% of that goes to the pay.
It's the old adage, you get what you pay for.
Right, exactly. Let's see, another question for you. What are your thoughts on pairing social workers to police officers and putting them on the street together?
I think it can be extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
I think that you're going to put people out there that are unarmed and are there to do the right job. I applaud their intentions.
Yeah.
But now you got a police officer that has to look out for themselves, maybe their partner, and a third person who is relatively defenseless. Yeah. You know, and so.
And dare say, ignorant?
Yes, absolutely. I would just to send that type of person into a life and death situation, which a lot of these are, and to expect them to know what to do, when to do it, and when to get the hell out of the way or run for cover is, I think, a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Do I understand the intent? Absolutely. Do I think that's the way to do it? I don't. I do not believe.
Yeah, the road of intention, you know, it's built with bricks of, the road to hell is built with good intentions. You know, I guess, let's see, I got one more question for you. Mental health. We talk about mental health a lot on this program, and there seems to be a extraordinarily mental crisis of mental health within the United States of America. How do you see mental health in law enforcement today, and where would you like it to see? Where would you like it to go?
Well, luckily, I came from a big agency that had a psychological services, and at any time you could walk over there and talk to one. I was always trying to be the tough guy, you know, didn't want to admit I had a problem, but I had a problem. If you read about it in the book, you know, just it comes back to overpressure. You know, time and time again, exposed to overpressure is going to take a toll on your hearing, sometimes on your brain. It's going to do things to your body. Well, time and time again, exposed to blood and gore and horrific scenes is going to take a toll on your body. In the book, I talk about a box in the back of my brain that I would take these bad experiences and put them away. You know, you see little children with their heads blown off. It's just, you know, brain matter all over the wall. It's just, it's horrific scenes that I was able to tuck it away, and I would keep that lid closed. Toward the end of my career, that box was getting full, and every time I opened it to put a story away, I couldn't hardly get the box closed, and I knew my time was coming, and thank goodness I recognized that. But some people just don't have a box, and I mean I know. A good friend of mine is a Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam. He saw horrific things. He's as normal, at least acting, as any of us. And then I see other soldiers that go in and don't see half, a fraction of what he saw. And yet they're traumatized by PTSD. And I understand their feelings. It's just, it's not cut out for some people. So I think it's identifying that, and especially these smaller agencies that don't have exposure to psychological services, it can be a real problem. 2 of the main characters in my book committed suicide. Good friends of mine, you know, and several others. Alcoholism is rampant in the law enforcement. You know, a lot of them are functioning alcoholics. They go to work every day and they don't drink, but as soon as they get off, they're drinking until they fall asleep at night, and they get up next day and they start it again. And I was right at that myself at one point. And it's just dealing with all of the stress and all of the horrific things that you see as a result of your job. So I don't know how a homicide detective does it, and I've known several. You know, thank God we got them that are willing to go into just death and gore every day, all day long. That's what they do, and then turn around and have to go to an autopsy and watch a human body be filleted day in and day out. You know, it's just part of their job. And their box is really big. It's the only way I can explain it.
That's a great way of putting it. Great way of putting it. So you talk about the book, The Long Road Home. We've talked about it a lot. You made several references throughout the program. your wife helped you put this thing together. It's a collection of stories of your career. Tell everybody why they should have this in their library at home.
Well, for the cops out there, it's a story about all the things we got away with in the 70s and 80s that you can't get away with now because of cameras. And not to say that I did everything right, I didn't. And I always joke that the only reason I didn't get fired or indicted is because I didn't get caught. And when I did get caught, I blamed it on somebody else. That's a joke, obviously, but believe me, operating as a law enforcement officer in the 70s, today, there's no way you would make it.
Yeah.
But it's a different culture. You're taught different. There's different rules of engagement. So understanding that, then you would operate different. I would sit around a bunch of people and tell those stories, and they kept saying, you ought to write a book. And so it follows, it's a fictional character, loosely identified as myself, but a changed name, and I had to change everybody's names. And when people found out I was writing this book, they called me up and said, "Hey, you're not writing that story about the time." I said, "No, I'm not writing that one." Okay, good. And then, everything happens to this one character, right? And I just had a blast writing it, some of the stories, because most of them are funny. Yeah. And it truly is a front row seat to the greatest show on earth. And the things that a cop out there sees day in and day out, especially if they're a hard-working cop. Some people, we would say, they never run you off for doing nothing. They run you off for doing something. And you get those hard-working cops out there in a really, really busy beat. They're seeing a lot every day, and they're taking a lot of risk every day. But every one of them could write a book, and that's all I did is sat down and wrote the book. But I had so many stories that the publisher said, these are too many. Amazon won't even print this. So I had to take a bunch of stories out, and now I'm in the process of writing a sequel to it and using the rest of the stories.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, Sandy, thank you for your many, many years of service in uniform to the United States and specifically the city of Houston. I'm sure you've saved many lives over the years and hopefully put a lot of bad people away. And, I think that you exemplify what it means when we say, support those who serve and what it is that we here in the United States of America have in front of us as an opportunity. And I want to say thank you for your many years of service and, continue to do that today by telling great stories and sharing your story with many others in the next generation of future law enforcement officers.
Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for your service. And if I can ever be a help in the future, I'm here for you.
All right. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Where can people find the Long Road Home?
Amazon.com.
All right.
Best place to find it.
There you go. And ships fast, I hear, Amazon.
I'm hoping.
Right on. Well, Sandy, we want to say thank you for coming out today. And for all of you at home, you know the rules. Be kind to one another and wash those stinking hands. We'll see you again soon on American Grit. Till next time, toodaloo.